very strange not to be the first one on this stage for once. Thank you so much for that wonderful intro, Mark and Emily. It's actually a huge honor to be here. So I'm here to talk about decisions, because it turns out as product people, we make a lot of them. We probably spend more time making decisions than just about anything else. And I might be famous or infamous, depending on your perspective, for drawing this Venn diagram that defines product management as the intersection of the customer, technology, and business. But part of me thinks I really should have just drawn this Venn diagram, because I feel like this is all we do all day long. And decision after decision after decision quickly becomes pretty overwhelming. I know I've come home at the end of a day so exhausted from making decisions that I can't even choose what I want to have for dinner. So I want to see a show of hands. How many of you have ever felt overwhelmed by the number of decisions that you've had to make as a product manager, as a founder, as a designer? Yeah, I figured most hands went up. I asked Twitter as well, and we found that over 74% of the people who responded felt overwhelmed at least once a week. But why are decisions so overwhelming? I want to take a step back and look at the psychology a little bit and then dig into it a bit more. And there's two factors at play. The first one's called decision fatigue, and the second one is the paradox of choice. You can map them out as a 2x2, like all good consultants would do. So on one axis, we have decisions. And the research shows that we make a staggering 35,000 decisions a day. Just since I've come on stage, you've all been making decisions. Should you sit up straight? Do you want to slouch down? Do you want to lean over a little bit? Are you going to respond to that notification that you got on your phone? Or are you going to listen to my words? A lot of these are obviously subconscious or unconscious, but it still adds up. If you're driving, research has shown you making over 200 decisions for every mile of driving. We make over 200 decisions a day just about food. Now, only 100 of these are probably fully conscious decisions, but that still adds up. And in their book Willpower, Roy Baumeister and John Tierney showed that the more decisions you make throughout the day, the harder each decision becomes. Now, there's a lot of back and forth, and they're still researching, and psychologists are debating the methods used for this book, so it's not necessarily 100% accurate. A lot of the things they talked about around willpower being a one-and-done depletion probably aren't right. It's probably ebbs and flows throughout the day. There's been other theories around our blood sugar and the impact that has on our ability to make decisions, but that's also been debunked. So there's still research going on into this. But I think it's fair to say that we've all felt this decision fatigue at some point. Now, the second axis is the number of choices or the number of options each of those decisions brings. Imagine you're going into a supermarket and all you're thinking is, I'm thirsty, I want something to drink. The choice is quite literally overwhelming. Do you want milk? Do you want flavored milk? Do you want a soda? Do you want water? Do you want vitamin water? Do you want flavored water? Do you want sparkling water? I'm sure there's a diet water. If you just go in thinking I'm thirsty, you're going to be standing at that fridge for a while. And so Barry Schwartz, who's a psychologist, in his book, The Paradox of Choice, showed that each new option adds to a list of trade-offs. And those trade-offs have very real psychological consequences. Simply put, the more choices you have, the worse you feel. Now, the economists will tell us that zero choice is the fastest route to low quality. And I'm sure we've all seen that in any market dominated by a monopoly or a dominant business. That quality goes down, the user experience goes down, because they can get away with it. So of course there's a middle ground. And Sheena Iyengar, who's a professor at Columbia, has continued the research that kind of happened around the time of Barry's book, and has been doing it in the decades since. And it has shown that if you give a small number of options, 3 to 4, rather than a large number, over 10, you're more likely to make a choice, you're more confident in that choice, and ultimately happier with that choice. So if we go back to the supermarket, and instead of just thinking, I'm thirsty, think, oh, I want to pick me up. I want something with caffeine. We're starting to limit our choices. And actually, I don't want any sugar. And suddenly, there's a lot less choices, and it's much easier to just pick the thing you want and get out of the store. If you think about those trade-offs, they have some funny math, right? If you're looking at two different options, you're comparing 2 waters or 2 sodas, it's pretty simple. There's one trade-off. But they grow a lot like a network effect. They grow exponentially. So 4 options gives you 6 trade-offs. 8 options gives you 28 trade-offs. 16 options will blow your mind. So on the one axis, we have decision fatigue. On the other, the paradox of choice. And that's before we even became product managers. So it's no wonder that we kind of end up in this decision overload. But what can we do to reduce that and get to where we want to be and make deliberate decisions in our work and in our lives? Unlike every other 2x2, you don't actually want to be in the top right corner of this one. You want to be in the bottom left corner. It's a happy place. So how do we reduce that decision overload? Well, one way is to look at what Steve Jobs, Barack Obama, and Mark Zuckerberg have in common. Any guesses? They all wear the same clothes every day. And they've all explicitly said that they do this to reduce the number of decisions they have to make every day. So that's one way, maybe slightly extreme. But how do we actually reduce product decisions? Well, the first thing is don't offer too many choices in your product. But other people have spoken and written much more eloquently about that, so that's a talk for another day. It's also important that you rethink how you make decisions about your own product and about the work that you do as a team. And that brings up why product decisions are so overwhelming. And I think it's because of a paradox of autonomy. Now, hopefully you've read my writing about this and know that I'm a huge fan and a huge proponent of autonomous, strongly empowered teams with cross-functional skills, all those good things. As Steve Jobs says, it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and tell them what to do. We hire smart people so that they can tell us what to do. But left unchecked, autonomy can be a little chaotic. Everyone's kind of running in different directions. Everyone wants to build something different. This guy in the bottom right corner is like, please read my story. Let's build this thing. So as Jeff Bezos says, success comes from aligning on those high quality and high velocity decisions. It's not about removing autonomy, but it's giving direction. And it's having a frank conversation about where you want to go. Instead of looking at all the possible options in the world, having that conversation about where you want to go can help you give a direction, can help you have a direction. There's still a lot of choices. There's still a lot of things you have to go do research and discovery on. There's still a lot of autonomy for the team, but at least we're heading in a direction, and we're limiting some of those choices. Sorry. So, alignment means less decision overload, better decisions, and hopefully happier teams. But how do we create that alignment? And that's where I've come up with a mental model I call the decision stack. It starts with the vision. Hopefully all your companies have a really strong vision. You know where you're headed. This is that big, hairy-ass goal that might not even be achievable in your lifetime. It then connects down and cascades into strategy. You're probably using objectives or OKRs, the exact tools I don't care as much about. And then you're thinking about opportunities or initiatives or projects that you want to do or new features you want to build. And finally, underpinned by principles. Now, there's nothing new here. I haven't invented strategy, but the value of this mental model is reminding us to do the work. And it helps us connect the dots for a few different reasons. So first of all, it helps you be very explicit about what you want to say no to. And that's almost as valuable, or even more valuable, as what you're actually saying yes to. And the decision stack exists at multiple layers in your organization, right? If you're a big company, you probably have it at the company level, you have it at the business unit level, then you have it at the product level. But if you're a startup or you're running a product team, you can think about it as one simple stack. The other ways it helps is from the top down, you can ask simple questions like how? How are we achieving this vision? Well, here's our strategy. How are we going to achieve that? Here are objectives, and so on. But it also helps all of you who are individual contributors ask, why are we doing this? Why are we building this thing? Well, hope it's going to achieve this objective. Why are we doing that? Because it's going to achieve this strategy, and so on. And that's really powerful, because then as soon as that crazy idea comes up that's off to the side somewhere, you can go, hang on, this doesn't connect. We're going to say no to that. It's also a really powerful model because you see when there's something missing, and the whole chain breaks down. And as we all know, if you remove the wrong Jenga block, things are going to fall over, or the gift's not going to play. So I've been in product for a long time, as Mark said, and the two things that I see most commonly missing in the organizations that I advise, the startups I work with, are strategy and principles. And this kind of befuddles me, right? Strategies, I'm not reinventing this. This has been around for a long time. If you've ever gone to business school or done a business course, we talk about strategy a lot. Any MBAs in the room have spent a lot of time on strategy. HBR has shown that there's over 100 product strategy frameworks, and that list is over 10 years old at this point. So I'm not entirely sure why we have to have the conversation, but I think it's because it's hard. And so I don't care which framework you use to come to a strategy, but you have to do the work as a team. And to give an example, my favorite is from 1969. It's even older than I am. And it's called the SWOT analysis. If you've never done a SWOT analysis, it's looking at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And strengths might include things like your capabilities in-house, you might have a technological edge, you might have unique insights from the market, or unique distribution channels. Your weaknesses include maybe you don't have enough capacity or the right skills. You might have a mountain of tech debt to get over. Opportunities include what's happening out in the market, right? What are the trends? If you were in mobile e-commerce 15 years ago, you were ahead of the trend and you were beating out all the desktop competitors. Threats are, if you're a desktop e-commerce site 15 years ago, you were probably getting beaten out by all those mobile guys, right? But it's also important to make it actionable. Just doing the analysis isn't enough, and that's where we product people have a superpower, because we know how to think about these 4 risks that Marty Kagan has highlighted. We know how to make sure that the things that we're going to do are usable, viable, feasible, and valuable. So to give an example, my last job before I went to the dark side was as the interim chief product officer at Kazoo here in the UK. And they got started about 2 years ago and looked at the UK used car market. And they saw that it was a huge market that's highly fragmented. The biggest single market share competitor had 2% of the market. So there's a huge long tail of tiny dealers on the corner with maybe 10 cars on the lot. And therefore, the whole industry has a famously terrible customer experience. So the opportunity was this huge market that's sitting there, barely been penetrated by e-commerce, when everything else in the UK was about 30% e-commerce. But it would also take significant capital to succeed in. Threats included US companies that might want to expand into Europe, or those UK offline businesses. Even a 2% market share was an 8 or 10 billion pound business might want to come in and invest in e-commerce. So the strategy was definitely about product. Yes, they wanted to build a great e-commerce experience, but that's kind of a solved problem. They needed to build an excellent operational experience because they wanted to be able to deliver cars within 48 hours anywhere in the UK. And then an odd-looking thing in a strategy, because it's not really about product, was just to go and raise enough money to do that. If you're going to go buy 3,500 cars to open your store with, you're going to need a bit of cash to do that. And there's not a lot of people who can do that, but the founder of Kazoo had a long enough track record of founding LoveFilm and Zoopla that he could go do that. So they launched 18 months, 2 years ago. Within 2 years, and I was the 5th person in the door. hired the first product team, kind of got them up and running, and then got out of the way. And within 2 years, there were 450 people in product engineering. They had SPAC'd last summer at $8 billion on the US stock market. Now, the market conditions have changed somewhat, as I'm sure everyone's aware, so that value's cratered, but it's still a significant business that's been built in just 2 years because of a focus on strategy. So strategy is hard, but that's not an excuse to avoid it. The important thing is strategy is everybody's responsibility. So even if you're an individual product manager or you're just the head of product for a couple of teams, you can't wait for the director or the VP or your founder or your CEO to do this. If it's not in place, you have to make it happen. So go out and learn how to be a great strategist and how to talk about strategy, and make sure that that conversation is happening. Now, the other end of the decision stack that's often missing, and I feel is almost the most pernicious, is principles. As Roy Disney said, and Roy was the nephew of Walt Disney, who's a senior executive at the Disney Group for many years, and credited with saving Disney at least twice in that time, said, "It's not hard to make decisions when you know what your principles are." And I was lucky enough to learn this quite early on in my career. So my first job as a product manager was 1999 at Monster. And can we just marvel at what the internet looked like in 1999? It's kind of amazing. And if you don't know, Monster is obviously a job board, and so it's a two-sided marketplace. On the one hand, you have job seekers looking for jobs. On the other hand, you have the recruiters looking for those job seekers. And so you can imagine that almost every product decision can be built in a job seeker-friendly way, or it can be built in a recruiter-friendly way. And when I started there, we had that debate almost every time we were coming up with a new feature, a new product, a new initiative. Until a few months into my job, I was in the headquarters just outside Boston in the US, and we were having the same debate again around the table, and I saw the CEO and co-founder walk past the room. And so I pulled him in and I said, "Please, just give us a few minutes, help us with this decision." And so he listened for a bit, and then he said, "Hang on, job seekers always come first. Because if we build an amazing experience for those job seekers, the recruiters will have to follow." And so we didn't talk about it as such at the time, but it became a principle for us that kind of guided every decision afterwards. So every time we got into that debate, it's like, no, we're doing it job seeker friendly. That's our guiding star, that's our North Star, that's our principle. And it just cut out all those discussions. All of those debates just went away. Suddenly we had time to do other stuff. We could go do more discovery. We could go do more work. So past decisions focus your future decisions. And those decisions are your product principles. Now, the important thing is product principles are not just values. How many of you have one of these on a wall or a Miro board or talk about these as your team values, company values? I know I have in the past. I'm seeing not that many hands go up because I think you know I'm about to call you out. Does anybody here not want to build a delightful user experience? Have you ever gone into a meeting about a feature and going, here's a really shitty user experience I want to build? And then someone goes, hang on, that's not in our principles. These are, of course, admirable things. We want to do this. We all want to do these. But they don't help you make any decisions. And sadly, this is rife across our industry. So Zing in Germany did this research when they were looking at their own values. And almost every company out there has some level of this kind of fluffy, ill-defined, very generic team value. Product principles have to be a framework for decision making. And there's a few really good ways to do that. So first of all, you have to be really specific about the trade-offs that you're happy to make. You can use what's called an even overstatement to call those out. So you might want to talk about conversion, even over revenue. You might want to talk about job seeker, even over recruiter, like we did at Monster. You might recognize these from the Agile Manifesto. And much like the Agile Manifesto, we're not saying that the things on the right are not important. We're just saying that the things on the left are more important in any trade-off conversation. So some examples from around the industry that actually do work and do help are Google, who have focus on the user and all else will follow, very much like what we did at Monster. Shopify actually flips this on its head, and they talk about putting merchants first, because they believe by building the best possible merchant experience, then they'll have amazing stores, they'll have amazing merchants, and purchasers, customers will come. Klarna gets super specific about this. Conversion trumps profitability optimization, because they want to focus their teams on making sure that conversion, getting the sale, is more important than eking out every last cent of profit. And Supercell, the gaming company, talk about long-term retention over short-term retention. Again, they're a gaming company. Of course they care about short-term retention. They live and die by day 2 retention in the gaming industry, right? But they want their teams to think about long-term engagement, long-term value, even over that short-term stickiness. The second thing is principles align with your decision stack. If they're not helping you answer these questions of how you want to build things and why you're building things, then they're not helping you make those decisions. And everything you said no to when you were developing the stack, that's probably a principle. Most importantly to me, principles actually let you spend time on the important decisions. It's not that we don't want the debate, it's not that we don't want the discussion, it's not that we don't want that argument, but we only want to have it once. So we want to be able to spend time on it. We want to do the research. We want to work with our stakeholders. We want to test some hypotheses. We want to have wild, loud arguments around the table. And then once we've decided, we codify that. And then we don't have to have the debate again. Now, I just crapped a bit on values, but principles can actually help you make your values actionable. So instead of saying these generic things, instead of saying build a delightful user experience, you might do what Pinterest does, which is say it's intuitive, not learned, helping their teams focus on intuitive, easy to understand experiences over relying on onboarding tools or support documentation or things like that. Instead of saying make something people want, you can do what Co-op does, which is say we design for everyone, making their teams think about accessibility and usability over everything else. Instead of just saying excellence, you can copy Google and say fast is better than slow. Again, it's just making your values actionable. So good product principles describe how you want to build your product and the trade-offs that you're willing to make. They're specific to your company, your strategy, and your vision. They're backed by that evidence, research, and engagement. They're actionable, memorable, and simple. And fundamentally, they help you make decisions. Bad product principles, on the other hand, are the meaningless fluff that are only kind of generic values. They don't, therefore, differentiate you from your competition. At the end of the day, we all want to make delightful products. And therefore, they don't help you make decisions. Now, we're not reinventing the wheel here. Design has design systems. They don't debate the color of the button or the size of the font every time they create a new feature, a new layout. Engineering has their coding principles about how they do documentation, what formats they want to use. So product needs product principles to try and cut some of that debate and argument and cut down on the decision load. So as Mark said in my intro, I am a partner now at EQT Ventures, where I help advise all of our portfolio companies on these topics. And I wanted to share some examples of how they've been doing this internally. So Code Sandbox is kind of a next-generation developer tool. It's bringing that developer environment into the cloud, so you have a multiplayer user experience, all those good things. And so their principles are around teams over individuals. Because again, that's what differentiates them from every other coding tool out there, which is a standalone desktop tool. They focus on integration over composability, and on sensible defaults over configuration. And that last one's kind of a 2-for-1, right? Because it's helping them make decisions, but it's also helping reduce decisions for their end users. Another example is Kite Maker, kind of next generation issue tracking tool, or as I want them to call it, a Jira killer. And they focus on collaboration over documentation, because they want to be a tool where product, design, and engineering work together. They don't want to be a tool where you just document things and throw it over the wall at each other. They also want to meet their users where they work, so they integrate into Slack, Figma, GitHub. And they call out that they're not an issue tracker. They want to rethink it every time they come up with those, and they have that temptation of just maybe copying a feature, and maybe just doing it the way it's always been done. And the last example is Vev, which is, again, next generation kind of design tool. It's a no code for the designers, but kind of full code for engineers. Again, internally, I talk about it as Webflow, but for professionals. And again, they're focusing on teams, because again, their USP is about that collaboration, about bringing designers, engineers, and content creators together. Initially, they focused on product engagement over revenue optimization, because that's what the market wanted from them at the time. And this also goes to show that these things change, right? Because the market changed under them, and they had to kind of flip it around and go, actually, now we're focused on predictable ARR growth over product enhancements, because that's what the market wants now. But they're still focused on teams, because that's how they drive their value. And they're still focused on bringing everyone together in one tool. So product principles help you make decisions, but how do you actually get started? Well, from the bottom up, you should use your retrospectives. Every time you get together as a team to talk about what went well, what didn't go well, talk about the decisions that you made throughout that time as well. As I said, codify those regular debates instead of having it over and over and over again. Set aside some time, have it properly, do the research, shout at each other for a bit, and then write down a decision and move on. Anything you said no to in that cycle is probably also a principle. And from the top down, for the leaders in the room, reinforce your strategy by being very clear about what trade-offs you're happy with. What's really going to make your product successful? Provide focus for your teams and help say no to things. Don't keep saying yes and on the feature list. Provide focus. So that's the decision stack. And if we go back to this kind of decision overload 2 by 2, one way to think about it is that strategy helps reduce the number of decisions that you and your team have to make every day. And the principles reduce the number of choices that you have for every decision. And so that's how you make better decisions faster. And whether you're a product manager or a product leader, this is your responsibility. We are all responsible for making sure that the stack is clear, that it is in place, and we all know what we're doing. So keep asking questions until your decision stack is clear. From the top, make sure you're asking how at every step. And from the bottom, keep asking why. Be that squeaky wheel in the room of saying, why are we doing this? This isn't helping us with our objectives. This isn't helping us with our strategy. And keep answering questions as well. This is how we define these things, is to go do the user research, bring in the insights, do the product discovery that you all do. Make sure your strategy and principles are synchronized, because again, they're a reflection of each other, and they're kind of the sandwich around everything that is the actual work, right? Set the right cadence for these things. Your vision's probably pretty static. I like to think about these as the goals, you might not even achieve in your own lifetime. In a normal company, your strategy is probably 3 years, maybe 5 years. In a startup, it's until your next funding round. So if you're in crypto, it's probably 9 months. If you're in any other business, it's probably about 18 months. Your objectives might be on 6-week sprints, might be quarterly. Your opportunities are obviously in constant flux, as we all know. As we go do that discovery, as we figure out what's working, what's not working. And your principles kind of evolve somewhere in between, where they're reflecting those insights and those changes, reflecting those constant debates that you're having, but don't change as often as the things you actually work on. So I want to leave you with a final quote, which is from one of my favorite business authors, Peter Drucker, who's written an insane 39 books in his career, and who said that whenever you see a successful business, somebody once made a courageous decision. So make better decisions faster using the decision stack, because it'll help make room for those big, courageous decisions. Thank you very much.